Hey, what's up, y'all? Happy Tuesday. And welcome to AMA with LCJ. I almost forgot my name. I'm super excited to have you all joining me today. We're going to have just a good old time. Um, it is it is exciting. The topic that we're going to be talking about specifically today. It is one that if you've been here for any amount of time, I've already talked about it. And guess what? I'm going to talk about it some more. And the reason why is because as leaders, I think sometimes we have to hear things a few more times before it really is able to kind of click and lock in for us. So, thank you everybody for joining me today. So, today we're going to be talking about setting the stage for a successful new year. So, setting the stage for a successful new year. So, one of the questions that you may even be asking me is like, why are we talking about it right now? Why are we talking about setting the stage for a successful new year uh, at the end of November? Why aren't we talking about this in January? Well, here's my philosophy on this. If you're talking about how to set yourself up successfully for the next year, fiscal year, for a lot of people, start of the new quarter, some people may be in between. But anytime you are hitting the reset button, like a new quarter, like a new year, um, if you start to think about it when it's starting, my philosophy is it's too late, right? And so how do you go in and really figure out, like, I think that's one. Actually, let me rewind. One of the things that I believe made me so successful in my career was that I did not wait for permission to think, to plan, and figure out how I was going to move forward. Right? It's a lot easier to make an adjustment, right? Than it is to just sit and wait and twiddle your thumbs, be like, well, I want this person's input, this. It's easier for me to adjust than it is for me just to sit and kind of wait. And I think what that did was I was always sometimes I wasn't sometimes I was usually a step ahead, and that helped me get ahead in my career, right? So I'm not waiting. I'm not chilling, waiting for permission. I'm like, hey, I have figured out I'm going to start thinking about what's next now. And the best thing about thinking about what's best or what's next now is when you are not in the thick of whatever that next thing is, right? So this is why we're going to be talking about setting the stage for a successful new year today, and I'm not going to wait till December to talk about it because January is around the corner. And I think even if it's not the start of your fiscal year, I think a lot of people kind of mentally reset. And so it's a good opportunity for you as a leader just to be able to take advantage of that and leverage that as well. So when we're thinking about how we're going to set the stage for a successful new year, there are a couple things that I really want to think about and talk about with leaders with you all today. So first things first. In my newsletter, I talked a little bit about when we think about like what sets us up. I think one of the things that we really have to think about is we have to reflect, right? We don't have to like just bog down on it, but it's important for us to actually reflect on the previous year and what worked and what didn't. And I think about, at least for me, this year has been like a maze of successes, a maze of setbacks. Um really, with taking probably the biggest leap that I've taken in my career for quite some time by choosing to leave the cushiness of a corporate executive role to really build what I believe will be the next generation of leadership and thought leadership on leadership and culture and high performance. And I wanted to be able to build a community where leaders feel like seen and heard and fully supported, really outside the confines of what I would say is like corporate bureaucracy, right? Like I have no skin in the game one way or another with any organization. So therefore I can support leaders in a different way. And that's really what I'm most passionate about. And so I'm excited about building all of this. And so as I was writing my newsletter, it really made me think about like, man, I've come pretty far and now I get to bet um, on really my own resilience in this season, right? So and the thing that I said was, and I'm going to quote this in my newsletter. If you're not in my newsletter, make sure you go to my website, latoyacollinsjones.com, and sign up to be a part of this. But specifically, it says, as Nelson Mandela once said, it always seems impossible until it's done. And what these last 6 months have really taught me is that the power of resistance and the importance of keeping faith in our abilities, even when the odds are stacked against us, right? And what does my path forward look like for this year? And so I want to share with you all some of the things that you should be thinking about, I should be thinking about, and then we'll be making sure that, of course, as always, answering questions that you all may have. So once again, thank you all for joining me. Now, if you are joining me for the very first time, I just want to encourage you, do not be shy. I can actually read your comments real time and respond. And so I want this to be an opportunity for us to engage, to have conversation, and go from there. So don't be shy. Make sure that you're saying hey and asking questions, because I want this to be as valuable as possible for everyone. All right. So, one of the things that we think about when we're talking about setting the stage for a successful new year, number one is making sure that we have a clear path to success. Now, oftentimes, one of the things when I'm working with leaders and talking with leaders and coaching leaders, one of my favorite questions to ask is, what does success look like? If I were to ask you today, what does success look like? Could you tell me in a clear, concise way what success looks like for you? If you're watching and you're an individual contributor, that question is still the same. And if I was your leader, I probably would still ask you, right? Because when we think about making sure what like our goals are and how we're thinking about next year, it's not a checklist, right? This is really when you think about setting your goals and what success looks like, this is going to be really like your North Star of what you're trying to achieve. It's one of the reasons why I'm a really big fan of what they call OKRs, which are objectives and key results, because I think it helps really kind of keep the main thing, and knowing that your day-to-day activities should be like flowing up and through what your key objectives are. And your objectives oftentimes are aspirational, inspirational. So I'm a huge fan of that. There's a book called OKRs for All. That's a phenomenal book. Written by the former, I think he's the founder, CEO of Ally. And like Microsoft acquired them, and that's actually their OKR tool now. But it's one of these things that as you start to think about breaking them down, what does that look like? How do I achieve success as a leader? You've got to know what this looks like for yourself as a leader. What does this look like for your team? Right. And so when we're setting these goals and we're thinking about it, one of the very first things before you even set a goal for this year, before you set a goal for next year, I really want you to think about what last year looked like, right? And so one of the things that I think about is there's a couple of things. And y'all, I got a new tool. Ooh, I'm excited. Okay, I figured out this hack so that I could actually, I'm really big on like talking and teaching at the same time, right? And so now, oh, don't mind just rearranging some things, right? So let's see if I can figure out how to do this. I did it well on the practice side. Let's see. I'm gonna don't need to share audio on this. So I'm gonna share. Oh, Snapskis. Okay, here we go. So when we're thinking about what worked well, what didn't, I think about a lot of things as a leader, right? Number one, you just literally have what I'll call like your, oops, wrong one. I'll call this your core work, right? This is your core work. This is the thing that your team is responsible for doing. Have I done this? Have I met these objectives? Now, for some people, when you're thinking about this, it may be projects, right? It could be sales. Um, if you are in marketing, it could be leads, right? Whatever it is, this right here should absolutely have a number. Now, you'll say, Toya, I didn't do that this year. That's okay. You could easily ask yourself, was it, I'm going to put this in a different color. Was it on time? Right? Did it have any mistakes? Right? These are things that you should be thinking about as a leader. Right? So as you're thinking about how you're going to set yourself up for success next year, first place is look at your core work. And then I would literally ask myself, like, right? Let me go a different color. I would say, what worked well and what didn't work well. Right? Because when you're trying to figure this out as a leader or even as an individual, when you start to ask yourself these questions, it puts you in a position to really think about how to actually not do the things that you don't want to do next year. I'll give you an example. One of the most common things that we see people do is what they call like a stop, start, continue. Right? And so in this, you would be able to start to figure out what it is that you want. So if things that were working well, naturally they would go in the cons, right? Things that weren't working well, you would probably put them in the stop, right? Or as you're diagnosing what wasn't working well, you may figure out like one of the things that didn't work well. I'm just going to use this as an example. Maybe with what wasn't working well was communication, right? So in your start bucket, you may say a comms plan, right? Maybe you weren't doing that. So that's like a really good example of, as we're thinking about as leaders, setting these goals, figuring out how we set ourselves up for success, you've got to look back. This is also why I'm talking about this now, and I'm not talking about this in December. Because what you want to be able to do is really be looking at all of these things, right? The things that we have here, your core work, your projects, whatever this thing is that you get paid to do, you want to be thinking about it when your mind and head is clear. Right? That's the key. That's the key piece of the puzzle in terms of that. So if you're not thinking about these when it's clear, when your mind is clear, then that is really how. Hold on here. That's what you kind of want to be thinking about, right? Okay, there we go. I'm going to turn this off actually. So that way I can see my whole face. So as you're going through and you're looking at your core work, your projects, everything on time, you've got to be able to look back so you know where you're going. Okay? So that's the biggest piece of the puzzle. So that's kind of part 1. And if you're with me, let me know. If you have any questions, let me know because I want to be able to answer these, like I said, realistically. So as leaders, as we're looking through what these checklists are, how we're moving through them, what they look like, I think about how are you going to break these down, and then what's going to work. And so even for some people, one of the things I think about is, another way that you can be thinking about this, maybe it's percentages, right? But that core thing of how you're going to build yourself forward and push yourself forward and creating a path of success for next year is absolutely understanding what happened last year, what you liked, what you didn't like, what you want to keep, what you don't want to keep, and then now, what does this look like for me next year? What does this look like for my team next year? Right? Some good things for leaders to even be thinking about, some goals. What are some goals that you can set as a leader? I personally believe that it should be required that leaders have goals around team morale, around team culture, not just performance. You know why? Because there's a saying, what gets measured gets done. And so then my question then becomes, as an organizations, what are you measuring? Are you measuring the culture of the organization? Are you doing more check-ins? Are you figuring that out? How do you know that the team is healthy? And it's funny because I was listening to a Gary Vee video the other day, and what he said was like so true. And it's like the thing that you know, but you don't know. But he said, not all retention is created equal. Just because you have people who stay in your organization, it does not mean that they are staying there because they want to be there. Some people are simply staying in the organization because they haven't found a better option yet. Whew, right? So that's what we have to think about as leaders. So culture will eat strategy for lunch every day. Peter Drucker. In other words, Latoya Collins Jones, what I like to say is, when it comes to culture, rent is due every day, which means you should have some type of deliverable towards how you're going to build culture. Hey, I'm going to do a team icebreaker once a month. I'm going to do, a team coffee chat. I'm going to have this many one-on-ones with my team. And what I love about that is you can measure the success of that, yes or no. There's 12 months in a year. I have X amount of people on my team. These are the amount of one-on-ones I did. Did I do these? Yes or no? Okay. That's kind of my soapbox. As we're talking about setting ourselves up for success, you've got to make sure that you're spending the time to reflect. Then you're figuring out how you're going to create the goals that you need to move forward. Okay. Let me know if you got any questions. I want to hear from you all. As always, please make sure if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. We'll have some conversation and continue to talk about it. So that's what we think about when we talk about setting goals for our path to success. Now, I've talked about the work side of things, right? Like, what do you need to complete? What does that look like? And hold on, I'm going to rotate this page. Okay. So the next thing, when we're thinking about how we are setting ourselves up for success, leaders, also, once again, any individual contributors, some of this stuff is going to be universal. It is things that I've done that have really propelled my career forward as a leader and as like just a thought leader in general. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is, how do you set yourself up for success? The next thing is a learning plan. Okay. It's a learning plan. I'm going to go back to sharing. Give me a second here. And no, we're going to go other way. Make myself smaller. Is a learning plan. So what is included in your learning plan? So you've got this learning plan. Now you'll say, Toya, how do I don't have time for a learning plan. I will tell you, you can't afford not to have a learning plan. You can't afford not to. The rate at which work is changing and evolving with AI, with technology, all of these things, you can't afford not to know. One of my greatest advantages in my career and even for my team is I create a culture of learning. So as you think about how you're setting yourself up for success next year, right? In the new year, what's your learning plan? What does that look like? Right? And so I think about it in a couple of different ways. I know people say, like, I don't believe in focusing a ton on your weaknesses. I believe in hiring your weaknesses. There are people on my team who could do what I do, who could do I could do it and I could do it well, but they could do it better than me. Hence why I hired them. Right. So there's no point in trying to get better and better and better at your weaknesses. Your learning plan should be accentuating like what you're naturally talented at. And then it should be continuing to skill yourself up. Right. Now, there are a couple of things that I think are non negotiable. All right, there we go. Not sure why my mic went out. So sorry about that, y'all. Okay, so when you think about your learning plan, I think there are a couple things that are non-negotiables, right? So when I think about my learning plan, number one, there's the one thing that I do when I think about my learning plan is number one, what's going on in my organization that I need to know about, right? That's number one. What could I be learning? If you I came from a tech industry, right? And so we were having new products, we're coming out with new things. Who can I have one-on-ones with to actually just continue to expand my knowledge of my organization? Not just the work that I do, but maybe I'm having quarterly one-on-ones with people who are also stakeholders who are not also directly in contact with me day to day, but I may be working with them every now and then. So that's number one. That should be a part of your learning plan next year, right? Maybe pick two or three people or two or three departments and just set them up once a quarter and say, hey, I want to learn more about your role. I want to learn more about your organization. How or what does this look like? I promise you, this has paid off in dividends for me in my career. One, if I need something, I know typically who to go to. If I need a favor and I got to call it in, I can actually call it in because I've built relationships outside of my nucleus team. So oftentimes, how I would look at it is I would say, we'll go a different color. This is my team. Okay. And this here may be your department. Okay. Typically, you are moving in and out of this quite often, right? So you know that looks like it looks like a really weird eyeball. Um, and so what you'll do is you're moving in and out of this group often, right? Now, what you have to think about is outside of here, what does this look like? So I'll give you an example. So for me, because I was in D&I, there were a couple of places where I really made it a point to build relationships. So one of the things that I did was I made a relationship with marketing. I made relationships with our HR business partners. Even though we sat in HR, business partners were the ones who were feet to the ground, right? I made relationships with what I would call as like key leaders in the organizations. So knowing who's doing what. And so just once a quarter, like I'm not talking about you've got to go in and go from there, but like once a quarter, right? Who else? For me, I actually liked meeting with the tech office or digital office, chief digital office, because it was good for me to understand technology wise what was going on. Right. So these are all pieces. So my question to you is outside of your team, and then that red part is I'd say like your skip level, who you report to. Who are you building relationships with to get a better understanding of your organization and your goals and what's going on? Because if all you know is what's in this little bubble and all you do is build relationships here, your career eventually will be stunted. You got to know, you got to build up. People like, and I think it's always tough because, particularly growing up, you're taught like go to work, if you do good work, put your head down, it's going to work. That's not how that works. Not how that works. Newsflash. People need to know you. People need to understand. You need to understand your organization. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about. So, right. So we're talking about part one. For those of you all who are just joining me, we talked about setting goals and all those things. Now we're talking about the next step and setting up the stage for a successful career, which is embracing learning and innovation. So we talked about, okay, what in my organization am I trying to figure out? What do I need to be looking at? How does this look? Next piece of the puzzle. Okay. So now we talked about the organization. Okay. As part of this learning plan, continuous learning. The other thing is a skill. Okay. Skills keep you sharp. Now, if you go back and we look at uh-oh, it froze. Let's see. Let's make sure we've got all the pieces of the puzzle. Let me hold on here. For whatever reason there, it let's see. Okay, there we go. Okay. I was like, it doesn't want to show that. It doesn't want to show the other L. I promise it's there. Okay, there we go. Just had a little bit of a delay. So the other thing is the skill. Okay, so when you're thinking about skills, we talked about assessing like what works, what didn't work last year, right? What do I want to stop, start, continue? So for you as leaders or individual contributors, maybe your skill set, some of the things that you and what I'm about to say is going to be slightly contradictory to what I just said a minute ago, which was like not always working on your weaknesses. If your weakness is in what I would consider part of your core responsibilities, you absolutely need to work on that skill. There are a couple of skills that I think you should absolutely always skill up in. I don't care what your job is, I don't care what your role is. All right, you ready? Two skills that I think you absolutely should always build in. Number one is communication, period. You should be skilling up in some form of communication, right? Whether it's learning how to be more concise, whether it's getting better at presentations, whether it is how to handle rejection, crucial conversations. Like, I don't care what it is. Everybody can always get better at communication. This is a skill you should hone all the time. I don't care what your job is. Get better at building this skill. This should be on your list. It could be just, hey, I'm going to read 2 books on communication this year as part of my learning plan, right? It could be how to win friends and influence people. It could be Talk Like Ted. It could be, these are all books on communication. It could be Crucial Conversations. I'm trying to look and see what other books I have on communication. Like, I'm looking at them right now. They're probably in my closet. I'll have to go back and look. But communication is a skill that should be in your learning plan for next year. Once again, for you leaders, if you're watching and you say, I don't have time, you have to make time. I promise you, it will pay off. So that's skill number 1. Skill number 2. Skill number 2 that every leader should do. Oops, I spelled that wrong. Oh, the pressure. For those of y'all, I am a legitimate millennial. I don't know how to spell unless there's a squiggly line. Technology. There we go. That's an H. I'll clean that up for you guys. I have horrible handwriting. Okay. Technology. Technology is the other skill. Oh, see, Jess, thank you. I'm going to drop this in here. So Jess said 4 essential keys to effective communication in love, like, and work anywhere. Ooh, thank you for the recommendation on the communication. I love that. Thank you, Jess. So technology is the other one. This is the one that people don't like to do. Why? Because technology changes all the time. But here's the deal. I've always been an early adopter of technology. I remember my last role, we had just got Teams, right? I put our entire D&I org on Teams months and months and months before most of the organization had adopted it. So while everybody else is trying to figure it out, my team is already comfortable and used to it. Right. And so these are things for you like technology. Technology will be the enabler of productivity, period. If you are doing work and if you're doing work, that didn't make sense. As you are working throughout the day, as I'm working throughout the day, 9 times out of 10, my first question is how can technology help me do this faster or more efficiently or correctly? I'm always thinking about it, right? Like I think about like the amount of time that like the amount of AI that I use now is insane. I use it every single day, all day. And it's not that AI is thinking for me, but AI cuts down on my time. And so you have to start to think about even like, and I'm even going to put a little asterisk here. You as leaders need to understand AI. And we talked about this. Go back and watch a live. I talked about this extensively in a few lives ago. Um, but communication technology is important. You've got to understand what's going on because technology is going to continue to be the determining factor of productivity down the line. You know how I know? Have you sat and tried to do something with somebody who now is working but still doesn't understand technology? How frustrating is it? How slow is that process? It's painful. I'll answer it for you. Right? So when you're thinking about how you're going to build your learning plan for next year, communication and technology should absolutely be in here. I think these are non-negotiables as you're coming in because without these, I think it's just going to become more and more and more important. Why? Because just think about the amount of data that we are consuming, the amount of data that we are manipulating and managing every single day now. If you're still trying to keep up with this in the old noggin, that's a lot of work and it's exhausting to try to do it that way. So the better you get at technology, the more you can actually use it to kind of cut down on all this like mental I hate to use the word because it's so corporate, but the bandwidth, right? The more that you're able to leverage technology to think and move and operate and like actually, I'll give you a good example. Because I used to wane back and forth all the time between using paper notes because I like writing things and digital notes and like actually typing them up. But here's the reality of the situation. There's nothing like, oh, you know what, such and such says something in this meeting. Well, if it's written, I've got to find that. I got to get the notebook and then I got to go back to the day. And if I did well at indexing it like a bullet journal, then I could probably go back and find the day. Or if it's in my OneNote, I can just search it. Right. And so it's so funny because a lot of times, like we would be at work and we'd be searching and we'd like people would be searching and looking for something or trying to find an answer. And people were like, well, I just would search it and I would have it. They'd be like, hey, how do you have that? I make sure there's a digital version of whatever it is I'm trying to do. It works wonders. And here's the thing, technology, the more you learn about technology, it actually most of this stuff is 1 to 2 clicks away to making it really easy. I'll give you a really good example. If you are using Outlook, if you click Outlook and you click on your meeting, you can actually just say, click the meeting, create notes. And you hit it and it creates a note. And then it asks you in this meeting, it'll automatically create the note. It'll tell you when the meeting was, who was invited to the meeting, all of these different things. You can come in and you can create the notes and then go from there. And it automatically saves to your OneNote. You can even say, it'll even ask you, do you want to share this with the people who were in the meeting or no? Right? Like, you don't even have to send it out. It's already done. So then you don't have to say, well, who had to follow up with who for what meeting and go from there. And now even, I don't know how many organizations have enabled this, but even now with Copilot, it's reading the transcript and giving you actions after the meeting. You don't even have to do that. Like, what? Technology, AI, learn it, get familiar with it, skill yourself up in these two areas, especially I'd say over next year. Make it a point. And I'm like, here's the thing. I think I talked about this last week or even the week before. You have to make time for learning. Leaders, I'm looking at the camera. I'm looking at you. Okay. I'm actually going to close out of the screen because I want undivided attention for a minute. Leaders, you have to make time for learning. Because as you learn and grow, your team learns and grows. So if you're not in the habit of doing that, then eventually kind of law of the lid can take over. And then your team, your capacity, your team can be here because you're here. But every time you learn and grow as a leader, your team has the ability to learn and grow as individuals, and you can learn and grow as a team collectively. That's where that magic happens. And so if you create this culture of that, that's where you're going to start to really see the needle moving, right? Help people get excited about setting goals and achieving those goals. You want people on fire to show up to work? Like, you've got to give them a North Star. And in the process, make sure that you are feeding them in the process. And there are two things that happen with that. When they are come in and they're inspired to do work and do great work, not just do work, but it has meaning and it has purpose, this is where you're going to start to really see the dividends add up. Doesn't matter what your job is. You know what? I can give you an example. I can give you an example that it doesn't matter what your job is. This still matters. If my McDonald's days, growing up, I don't know, like a lot of people have first jobs for McDonald's, right? In McDonald's, right? We still had goals. You had the second somebody placed an order in McDonald's in the drive-thru or in person, there was a timer that was clicking, right? And that timer was going, and that timer, if we got past a certain amount of time, that light would start to flash. In other words, hey, this is the amount of time that we want people in our drive-thru or in after placing the order. This is the amount of time we want them to get the food. It's starting to flash. This is how we need to cut down on that time. Right there, we'd be like, hey, our drive-thru time is too high. Right? Like, hey, we've got this amount of waste. Right? This is McDonald's. So I don't want to hear like your job doesn't necessitate having goals. Not true. Because if you can do it at McDonald's, you can do it wherever. Right? It's not, there's sales, of course, too. But there were all these other pieces of the puzzle that went in to being successful at McDonald's beyond just sales, right? And then it's like, hey, like I'll give you another example. How many of you all right now, you go to a fast food restaurant at the end, they'll be like, hey, by the way, can you fill out this survey? You'll get an extra 10% off if you come in and fill out the survey for me, saying that I did a great job. That's a goal. That's a measurable. Those are things that they're doing. I've frequented the ER close to my house more times than I want to, but we were just there a week ago because the little one cut his eye, got stitches. You know what she asked us on the way out? Hey, can you fill out this card? Give us feedback. Sure, why not? There's always an opportunity for you to set goals. And as your team is setting goals and figuring it out, it'll help you understand where you're gapped, where they're gapped, and then what are some things that you can be doing to build it. I'm hoping this is making sense. Y'all are quiet today. So I want to make sure that that we're good. So here's the other thing. So I do want to share this. Thank you, Jess. So I'm going to come back in. So we talked about continuous learning, right? And how continuous learning really is another piece of the puzzle that's going to set you up for success for next year. So we talked about goals. We talked about learning. And we talked about these two skills I think everybody should get: communication, as well as technology. But in that, Jess gave two books, and I thought that they were really good. So the first one was 4 Essentials to Key Effective Communication in Love, Life, Work, Anywhere. And then the other one she shared was Stop Talking, Start Communicating, Counterintuitive Secrets to Success in Business and in Life. Thank you for those recommendations. So we're at the 20-minute out mark. Those of you all who are watching on LinkedIn, those of you all who are watching on Facebook or YouTube, make sure that you send me some questions. If you have questions, let's continue to talk about it. I've got 20 minutes left today. And so I want to make sure if you have any questions really about setting yourself up or setting the stage for a successful new year, make sure you drop them in the comments. I'll be able to see them and share them just like I did Jess's recommendation. All right. So I'm trying to make sure I've got all the pieces of the puzzle. No questions. I'm going to get, I know this is on the delay. So hence, if I'm stalling, it's because I'm trying to give you all the opportunity to ask questions because I know it's on a delay. It's funny because a lot of these questions that I have, we've been talking about them. So like I've literally not put up a question this live, but it all kind of worked out because of how I covered this. I actually like this format better. Let me know if you like this. I feel like it allows for more conversation and just teaching and going from there. So here's one. Here's one thing that I do want to share with you all. As you think about reflecting on the year, man, y'all are quiet today. I've had like 2 very quiet weeks in a row. I know y'all are watching because I can see that you are watching because I can see the numbers. But y'all are just, y'all are making me work today. So, one of the things that I did was I went in and I was like, okay, what are some really good questions that you can ask yourself as leaders, right? And as we talked about looking over the year, there's one thing that I really want you all to make sure that you're doing, which is also documenting what you felt was successful, right? I know we talked a little bit about what works, what doesn't work. But I think it's important that you document you document the year. What were some of your accomplishments this year? What were some of your individual accomplishments? And then what were some of your accomplishments that you made as a leader? And it doesn't have to be work related. It can be, it could be interpersonal. It could be around communication. It could be around learning. It could be around any type of growth type of thing. So that becomes one of the ways that you can do that, right? So like really think about what were some of your significant accomplishments over the year. And then the other really good question that I think would be good to really think about and reflect is how have your actions or decisions positively impacted your team in the organization? Another really good question to be asking yourself as you're preparing for the year, because you can put that in that start, stop, continue bucket. Okay. Hold on. Let me just make sure I'm not covering. Man, y'all are making me work today. I'm like, yo, I got to make sure I got more questions queued up for you guys. Let's see. I'm looking, y'all. Give me a moment. I was not prepared. I was for sure thinking y'all were going to ask some questions today. So this one is good. I'm actually going to pop this one up because I think it's important. For a question for us to really discuss as we look at setting ourselves up for success for next year. So this question says, how can I set realistic yet ambitious goals for my team for the upcoming year? How can I set realistic yet ambitious goals for my team for the upcoming year? This is actually one of the reasons why I'm a huge fan of OKRs, which are objectives and key results. It's a methodology for looking at how you set goals, because it creates what they call stretch goals, right? And you want your goals to be realistic, yes. And I think that there's room for stretch, right? Like, so how I would think of it is I kind of have like a floor and a ceiling, right? Some people will set a goal that's just like absolutely ridiculous, right? But say for instance, you've been tracking, um, I'm just trying to think of something. Um, you've got 10 projects. Of those projects completed, of those projects, 10 projects started. Of those projects, 90 of them were done to completion. Of that 90%, so 9 got completed. Of that, 5 were completed on time. Right? So for me as a leader, my objective is, um maybe the objective then becomes, maybe the objective then maybe comes, or I guess the goal would be realistic is saying, hey, we're gonna have, not nine, we're gonna continue with 90% completion of a project. But this time we're gonna shoot for 90% on time. Those are things that we can potentially do. So that's kind of how I would set it. I think that there's a floor, and I think being realistic is just like, you got to know, if you have a data trend, follow the data trend. If you says, hey, year over year we've seen an increase of 10% year over year, then realistic yet ambitious may be 12 or 15, right? That's kind of how I think about how you can set ambitious goals but also realistic. Sometimes your team, you'd be amazed that when you give them just a little bit of stretch, they may be able to surpass it because you give them something to shoot for. Kind of like the whole saying, shoot for the stars, land in the clouds, kind of cliche. Right. Okay. So Jess said, great question. She said, could it be just as important to ask yourself how your decisions might have negatively impacted your team? And then the follow up is, perhaps there's no need to focus on the negative. Actually, I think you should. I think it's a really great question. Um, I would maybe frame it a little bit different. I would maybe frame it as, and I do have a cheat sheet. That's how I know. What the way that I would potentially ask this of myself as a leader, I would say, what are some of the biggest challenges I face as a leader? And then how do I address them or handle them? So, what were those challenges that you had? And then how did you address them or how did you handle them? Then, I would also then reflect on maybe what leader, like what lessons did you learn from these challenges? How have they made you or shaped you as a leader? Because sometimes, honestly, if we don't take stock of that, and that's a really good question, Jessica, because if you don't take stock of the things that didn't work well, or even asking yourself, hey, how did this challenge change me? If you don't stop, you may find that that challenge changed you in not in a space of growth. It could have actually taken you the other way. So I think it's important that you ask both of those questions. And I think, I'll go back up and I'll share this again. Um, let's make it a little bit bigger. So when we talked about, earlier, like what worked well and then what didn't work well, and it goes back to that framing, right? Like by asking ourselves what worked well and what didn't work well, I think that's kind of along the lines of how I would ask, like, what decisions were there, what worked, what didn't, and then really kind of moving to this start, stop, continue as you're thinking about the rest of the year, right? And so there could be pieces of the puzzle that didn't work well, right? Like you could say, hey, actually, communication wasn't that good this year. Or, there were gaps in communication between my team and stakeholders, right? That didn't work well. And then you've got to figure out how you're going to fix that in the coming year, right? And having a plan. Um, Another good example of maybe trying to figure out anecdotally, like what worked well, what didn't. It could be with the team, right? Team morale was a little low, this year because of workload. right? So what can I do to actually help alleviate that? What does that look like for me as a leader? Another way to really kind of assess it. So I think it's not necessarily saying like, hey, how does something negatively impact your team? Although that is like, there's a truth to that. But I would frame it around something that is maybe just a little bit more actionable. Because sometimes things just are what they are and they suck and you can't change that. And so by really reframing like what were your challenges as a leader, how you felt like you handled them, what you learned from them, how they may have changed or shaped you as a leader for better or for worse, right? And then even for your team as it pertains to your work and the work that you're doing, what worked really, really well, and then what didn't work. And then how do I figure out what that looks like? And the reason why, once again, we're talking about this now is so that it gives you time to think, right? Like I said earlier on in the live, the reason why I wanted to talk about it this week is because things can move a little bit slower in December. And I talked about maybe like a live or two ago about the phenomenon of, I believe, called like slowing down to speed up. This is a really good way of slowing down to speed up, right? You're taking advantage of the fact that things maybe aren't as busy as they would be because people are taking holidays, things are slowing down, you don't have as much work. And so then my question then becomes, do you fill that time and space with just more work, or do you make sure that you take advantage of the slowdown to speed up by actually taking time to think through things and figuring out what the plan is? And part of I'll go back to the survey that I did. So I did the survey. I asked, I think I had almost 90 leaders complete this survey. The number one thing, the number one thing that people said that leaders said they struggled with the most was prioritization. Now, here's what happens. If you take time to figure out what's important, what's not, what you want to be doing, what not, what your goals are for next year, prioritization becomes easier. Because if it's not moving you where you need to go, then you may need to figure out, hey, I'm going to drop this or I'm going to keep this. But part of the competing priorities that leaders are struggling with is because sometimes we just keep rolling over year to year to year to year and not pausing to figure it out. And I like beginning of the year, even, where I work, January was not necessarily the start of our fiscal year. It was like, but you still use that time to kind of start to mentally refresh. So for us, December, January was the end of our year, February started the beginning, right? And so I was using that same time. So if that's really, use this refresh mentality to your advantage and moving forward. I think that becomes a huge piece of the puzzle to really help you think things through. And the reason why I like it, regardless of where your fiscal year falls, is because people are still going to slow down this time of year, whether it's that time, like whether it's the end of your year or not. And so why not take advantage of that time to think? Leaders, hear me when I say this. Whether you want to believe it or not, you do not necessarily get paid to implement, to do. You get paid to actually oversee and align things and put them together. That's what you get paid to think. That is part of the equation of being leaders. It's not necessarily implementation per se. It is, yes, there's a point of implementation, but if you are not setting aside time to think as a leader so that you can actually move the pieces of the puzzle more efficiently, you're doing yourself a disservice. You're doing your team a disservice. So you've got to make sure that you're figuring out that time. And I think it becomes hard not to do that. Like, oh, well, I've got this. I've got this growing to-do list. I got all this stuff that gets done. But here's what happens. If you're not setting aside time to think and ask yourself the questions and plan like we talked about, you may be missing an opportunity to actually do something more efficiently or innovate or figure it out how to move it faster, right? Somebody at some point figured out, instead of doing inter-office mail, look, I'm a millennial, but I know about it. I worked at the YMCA in Kansas City, and there was this interdepartmental mail, right? And so what you would have to do is like that's how they would send us the paperwork when I was an intern. It would come like literally like interdepartmental, like somebody was like literally physically moving the mail, moving these documents from one YMCA to another. Somebody was like, wait a minute, there's probably a better way to do this. Right? But if you're not taking the time to think, then what happens? You don't you don't you don't get that space to figure out, okay, actually this worked really well. I want this to work better. This didn't work. I need to figure out how to get this more efficient. Because those are going to be the pieces of the puzzle that really for you that elevate you in your career, that also continue to elevate your team as well. And I can't stress this enough. Um, I say this a lot, but this is, I believe this, and I think leaders, it's important that we shift our mind. My team didn't work for me. I worked for them. I work for my team. I showed up for my team. And so because of that, the best thing that you can do, right, for your team when you work for them is figure out how to make their work better or easier for them to do. They'll appreciate it. Right? And as they figure that out and you figure out things for them and you're moving blocks, moving, roadblocks or helping things or getting them on a ramp faster, you'll start to figure out they're more productive, they're happier. And then we go back to that, not all retention is created equal. Now they're staying because they want to be there. That's where we're headed. That's where we're moving towards as leaders. It's that mindset that, hey, like I've got to build a great culture. I know I've got to manage the work, but I work for my team. And as a result of that, this is how we're going to get results. It's a game changer. It's a game changer. I promise you. Okay, look, here's the deal. Thank you all so much for joining me. I hope that this was helpful. LinkedIn, I know I got a couple of lurkers on LinkedIn all the time, but y'all don't talk. It may be time to get a new mic. I don't know what's been going on with this thing today. I know I got a couple of LinkedIn lurkers hanging around, but thank you for joining. Even if you don't say anything, I always appreciate just you watching and sharing everything that we're talking about, and I hope that it's beneficial for all of you. For those of you all who are joining from Facebook, from LinkedIn, from YouTube, same as well. Thank you. Do not take this lightly that you've taken an hour out of your day to really invest in yourself and to learn and to grow. And with that being said, I've got some exciting things that are going to be coming out. I'm going to be launching a coaching program, a coaching slash course program at the start of the year. So you'll be hearing a little bit more about that in the coming weeks. And so my hope is that I'll be able to really coach and impact leaders, not just here, but like in a more personal way. So that's going to be coming the beginning of the year. I have been heads down, stressed out, building this course. But it really is going to be an opportunity for me to dive in with everyday leaders and really figure out what it is that they want, and hopefully over time be able to just continue to build this program to something that is of value. So if your organization is interested in contributing a couple of people to this, let me know. Hit me up, lcj@latoyacollinsjones.com, or if you just want to have an entire cohort with your organization, let me know. It'll be launching at the beginning of the year. So you guys in the next coming weeks are going to be tired of me talking about it, but I'm going to be talking about it as well. With that being said, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your feedback and your support. If this was something that really resonated with you, please make sure that you like. If you're on, like, subscribe, share it. Every little bit helps me in continuing to drive forward and really being able to support leaders outside of the four walls or confines of the organizations that they're in, because that's really where my heart is. All right. With that being said, I'll see y'all next week. Peace.